Welcome to Speaking in Spoons with your host, Christina Brookman.
Hi, welcome to Speaking in Spoons, a chronically ill podcast. I am your host, Christina Brookman, with your co-host, the handsome Dr. Nate Straus. And with us today, we have Helena Berger from Rev Up Virginia and Rachel Loria from Disability Law Center, Virginia, to talk about voting and disability. Thank you, ladies, for being with us. Um, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about yourselves and your organizations. Helena, I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate this opportunity. As Christina said, I'm Helena Berger. I've been a disability rights advocate for over 30 years. When I say that, I sound very old because I'm probably getting old, but that's just the reality of it. I am the immediate past president and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities, AAPD, which is a national cross-disability nonprofit. I think the best way to think about it is an organization that's a civil rights organization for people with disabilities. And the focus at AAPD was increasing the political and economic power of people with disabilities. I retired from AAPD about 4 years ago. And one of the things I've been doing since then is I am the co-founder and co-chair of Rev Up Virginia, which stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power. AAPD runs the national program, which is called Rev Up. As I mentioned, we're Rev Up Virginia. And again, this is all about building the political power of people with disabilities, and specifically in Virginia. And we do that through voter education, increasing voter awareness, and increasing voter registration, and having events. We are nonpartisan. We have a coalition that meets once a month that's diverse in terms of including individuals with and without disabilities, disability organizations. Rachel is part of our coalition. And we have more what I call mainstream organizations, because we do want this to be as diverse as possible, even though we focus on the disability community. So I guess I'll leave it there. I don't want to monopolize too much time.
You're fine. And Rachel, could you tell us a little bit about you and Disability Law Center?
Sure. My name is Rachel Loria. I'm a senior disability rights advocate at Disability Law Center, Virginia. We are the state designated protection and advocacy office for individuals with disabilities. And part of that is a lot of our voting work that we do to make sure that people in Virginia have access to voting through Help America's Votes Act, HAVA. I am a disability advocate. I've been a self-advocate for my entire life. And I've been working in the field of disability advocacy for about 20 years. I do a lot of our voting work here. I also do a lot of our vocational rehabilitation work, making sure that people who have disabilities can work and have the supports in place that they need to work. And I also do a lot of our assistive technology work. So I kind of do a lot of different stuff. But we are primarily pro bono. We are a nonprofit organization that serves all of Virginians with disabilities, regardless of where they live throughout the state. We are centered in Richmond, but we travel throughout the state to help individuals with disabilities.
Great. So we are about to be at November 7th, coming up upon election. And I think a lot of people may not realize what can make voting difficult for people with disabilities. Even people within the disability community may not realize until they go to try to vote. So for those out there, what have been some difficulties for people with voting, and what have been some things. I know, Helena, we were talking earlier that we have achieved to at least in Virginia and maybe some other places in regards to overcoming some of those barriers.
Sure. Helena, you want me to start with the barriers, and you can.
I was gonna say, why don't we start
Yeah.
with the negative and then we'll transition to the positive.
Okay. Sure, I'll be the negative. You want to be the positive. So some struggles include access to curbside voting for individuals who have physical disabilities or who are 65 and above, access to a voting machine for individuals who are blind or visually impaired or have low vision, making sure that that voting machine is accessible. Every polling place is supposed to have a voting machine, but not every polling place has a voting machine that is accessible. Let me rephrase. Every polling place is supposed to have a voting machine specifically for people who are low vision or people who are blind, but not every polling place makes sure that those machines are accessible, and not every polling place has employees who understand how to set that machine up. Sometimes it just sits in a box. So we want to make sure that, if this money is being spent, that people can access the machine that they need to vote.
And is it sorry, is it my understanding that with curbside voting, every polling place is supposed to offer or have some form of accessible voting? Because I know that I didn't even think of like spaces. I went once and you had to go upstairs to get to the place where you actually cast your
Not
ballot.
really
And I was like,
accessible, huh?
yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, well, that's not going to happen this year.
So what we look for in terms of polling places is that there is curbside voting, or the bare minimum, a sign that has a phone number that tells you how to call and ask for curbside voting if you need it. We also want to make sure that the parking places, that specifically the accessible parking spots, are closest to the door. This can be a challenge because if the polling place is not accessible 24/7, sometimes they make these temporary changes for election day and they forget to move the parking spots so that they're closest to the voting entrance. We also want to make sure that there's no obstacles to getting in the door. And that can include stairs to get into the voting entrance.
Right.
Potholes, stairs. We want to look for curb cuts. And then the other thing that we look for is we want to make sure that the door is easy to open. It has a door that you can open with a closed fist, but also that it's not too heavy. If you can open it with a closed fist, we tell people to check yes on our survey, and I'll share the link to that. But we do also want to know if it's heavy or if it's not. Then this year, we are adding two other things to look for, because this year our office is starting to go inside, and we're asking at our own polling places where the accessible voting machine is, and making sure that the poll workers know how to set it up and use it. And we're also asking, because we had a lot of folks in the last election who wanted to ask for assistance with voting or wanted a family member to assist them, but didn't know what form to fill out to make that possible. And we're often rushed through that process and not given the correct form. So we want to make sure that there's advertisements in the polling place in letting individuals know that they can ask for this form. It's Elect 649. Letting people know that they can ask for, they don't necessarily have to say Elect 649, but just letting folks know that there's a form that they can ask for to request assistance so that there's less barriers in terms of voting. In terms of mail-in ballots, the signature, Helena, you're going to talk about the signature part, right? Okay. So I'll take that part out. Mail-in ballots should also be accessible, should also be, because, the signature element was not the only element that made those difficult. So we're working on that. Helena, you want to kind of talk about some of the breakthroughs that we've had?
Sure. So again, specifically in Virginia, we have seen voting become, and I'm going to use this word broadly, accessible or more accessible to people with and without disabilities. A lot of times in the disability community, when we talk about accessibility, right, we're talking about like physical accessibility. But in 2021, there was the Voting Rights Act of Virginia that passed. And what was in that law really also facilitated breaking down some of the barriers for people with disabilities. So, for example, voters are no longer required to have a photo ID. You still need identification, but not a photo. So, for many people with disabilities, they don't have a photo ID. They don't have a driver's license.
Right.
Right, and it becomes difficult to get a photo ID. So that became a real barrier. So in Virginia, you no longer need that. You can vote absentee without an excuse. Starting last year, you can also register on the same day that you vote. So all these things make it easier. With curbside voting, as Rachel said, what they did in that law was you have to have either like a phone number that you can call a text, or a buzzer so that the poll worker can come out and give you the ballot. Now, obviously, through the Disability Law Center, they found that there were still violations when it came to that. And we could talk about, enforcement issues, but nevertheless, it was written into the law. Early voting increased, but, you have 45 days now to vote, which again, is just making it easier for people when you have, right? It's a huge difference.
Yeah. I think people
Mail-in-
think like, why do people need that much time? But particularly people with chronic illnesses or any kind of disability, we don't know what it's going to be like when you wake up. Having that much time, or if you don't have transportation, you're reliant on other people to get there. You have to make those schedules. So that's just
Yep.
yeah.
And then the way you can return the ballot, I mean, you could do a mail-in, and that gets to the witness signature. So last year, the General Assembly voted to eliminate the witness signature. Now you just have to have your date of birth and the last four numbers of your social security number. And that became a barrier too. A lot of people with disabilities are isolated. To get somebody to be a witness is a problem. Certainly during COVID, if you're a person with a disability, you're usually or many times more at risk. So you don't want to have, somebody coming into your house during a pandemic. So again, that was a big, I think a big win. Also in terms of curbside voting, this did not pass last year in the General Assembly. It's going to be reintroduced, but right now it says it's only if you have a physical disability. So what we're trying to do is eliminate the word physical and just say disability. Right. So it's an opportunity, right, for anybody with a disability who needs it. So hopefully that will pass this year. Also in this new bill, it's also talking about training for poll workers, so they really sort of they understand, what the requirements are, and that becomes a huge issue. I mean, I think that is one of those barriers that even though poll workers are trained, I don't
it's
think
different everywhere you go.
Right? Yeah, it's not consistent, and I think they are getting trained on disability, but for whatever reason, as Rachel said, I think there's an inconsistency. So these are just some of the really positive things that happened in our state. I recently we read an article, and it refreshed my memory. The University of Illinois did a study in 2021, so one wasn't done last year. Virginia moved from the 49th place of a state that did, that sort of helped somewhat suppress the vote, to move up to 12th.
Wow.
Yeah. In terms of being a state that is, again, using the word more broadly, making voting more accessible and easier for its residents. That's a huge deal. That's a really.
What would you consider attributed to that the most, do you think?
I think, they took this survey in 21, the Voting Rights Act for Virginia was a 2021 bill that passed. So I think
okay.
a lot of the things I just mentioned now, they had the biggest impact in increasing the ability for people to vote. Like I say, both with and without disabilities. So
Right.
I guess this is a good segue just to talk a little bit about the impact it's had in Virginia. There was 2 studies that were done by Rutgers University and the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. It came out after the 22 election, so the midterm election. And so I'll talk first specifically in Virginia. So within that report, Virginia voting gap, which in 2018, and we go back to 18, so we're comparing apples to apples, right? Midterm election to midterm election. The voting gap between people with and without disabilities was 11.5%, minus 11.5%, meaning that was the percentage of people voting without disabilities over people voting with disabilities. In 2022, we had a 0% gap. That to me is huge.
That's
To
huge.
me, right? That
That's
to me
exciting.
speaks volumes, right? Speaks volumes about, yes, the state has improved, right? In terms of making sure more people can vote, but it also underscores the power that people with disabilities have, the political power that we do vote. Especially if you make it easier for us, we'll come out and vote.
Right.
And it was 53.2%, both for disabled and non-disabled voters. And again, for somebody who's been doing this work a long time, to see a stat like that,
That's
I mean,
huge.
to me is really powerful. And
Yeah.
when we started Rev Up when I was at AEPD or doing Rev Up Virginia, we talk about that political power, we talk about that potential, and we talk about the disability vote. And it's real. And this statistic makes it very real. So, I think what we really need to remember, if you make sure that you're not discriminating against people with disabilities and you're making voting easier, people with disabilities, like I say, will come out and vote, and will come out at the same rate as their non-disabled peers.
Right.
I have some,
Just give us an opportunity.
some of the national statistics,
I
which
was
we
just
can
going
get
to
into a
ask
little
that.
later.
Yeah.
So, and I'm looking because I don't want to get these numbers wrong. So I wrote some things down. So again, this goes back to the 2022 election. 15.8 million voters with disabilities voted in 2022. 1.6 points increase in the disabled vote. And there was a 1.6 decrease in non-disabled voters. And then that also shrunk the gap, the national gap. In 2018, it was minus 4.8 points. It's now 1.5 points. So again, that gap keeps shrinking. And we talk about sort of disabled voters voted at the same rate as non-disabled voters with the same demographics. We'd have an additional 2 million votes. And why I think that's so important is because we're talking about the political power and influence of the disability vote. And when so many elections, both national elections, state, local, are so close. I mean, just think about the last couple of presidential elections. Just as prime examples, they were so close. 2 million votes. If we could make a huge difference, and not just a difference, but it would underscore the power that people with disabilities have. We want our politicians, those who are in office and those running for office, to be thinking about the disability constituency that they have as the same constituency as what we call the soccer moms or older Americans who are known to vote at a higher percentage.
Right.
Black women are being courted because they've been voting at higher percentages. So it's time that, again, our elected officials, make sure they don't overlook the disability vote, because again, we're voting at higher rates and we could really impact the outcomes of election. The last thing I want to mention, just in terms of some of the stats that go back to the barriers. So in these reports, it said 14% of disabled voters had some difficulty voting. That was about 2.2 million people in 2022. And then when you look at in person, those who are voting in person, 20% of disabled voters experience a problem to only 6% of non-disabled voters. And this report said when it came to a lot of voting issues in the disability community, it was centered around folks with vision disabilities and cognitive disabilities, which to a lot of degree makes sense. Right? Making sure that the accessible voting machine is working, right?
That people who request an email ballot can get one electronically. They still can't return it electronically, but at least they can get it electronically and fill it out. That was something that we worked really hard for. I believe it was in 2020.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think cognitive and I think we're even getting better in the disability community, but something that I don't think we think as much about when we think about accessibility, and I'm curious if you agree, Rachel, is simple language. So if you're a person with intellectual disability or developmental disability,
right,
you need simple language. And I think, on the cognitive end, that I think is why you're still seeing barriers, because somebody could go into a polling place and just have, issues with the ballot, or, just understanding.
Even if the ballot's laid out differently than the sample ballot. That's been a huge thing. The ballot and the sample ballot are laid out differently, and people get confused because they don't recognize the way that the sample ballot is laid out versus the way the ballot
in between years. I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Also, needing assistance. I know, like Rachel was a big help to me last year because with the migraines that I have, I go through periods where I can't read for myself. And she was helping me, fill out the forms and stuff. But there was problems. I think it was the signature issue that we were having.
Signature issue, and I think it was also trying to change your address on the portal. I think we were having an issue signing into the portal.
And I was like, I can't imagine being somebody that didn't have someone that would qualify to do the to assist them, the signature, and then they're in a situation where you're not necessarily trusting who's doing your ballot, because that can be an extremely personal and emotional thing. And it's being disabled, you already have to trust people so much and rely on people so much, and that can be very hard. So it's just very encouraging and exciting to see all of these wonderful changes happening in Virginia, and I'm encouraged that it's happening in other places in the country as well.
I was gonna say, if you're interested if you're not in Virginia and you're interested in kind of getting involved with the voting changes in your area, you can go on to the webpage for the National Disability Rights Network, NDRN, which is www.ndrn.org. And I can share that link. They can connect you with your state protection and advocacy network, and most of the state protection and advocacy networks are doing voting rights work. So if you're in a different state and you want to get involved with the voting rights, and AAPD is also a great site to go on to get some of those resources too.
And we'll make sure to share, so those that are listening and watching, we'll have both Rachel and Helena's information, their organizations, informations and links, and the organizations that Rachel just recommended, so that if you're wanting to help or receive help, you can reach out. And speaking of what you were talking about just now, Rachel, that's a thing that I wanted to bring up. If people want to get involved, and they want to help out, either if they are disabled and they want to know how they can get help, or if they are able-bodied and would like to help, how can they help, like in Virginia?
Perfect
Please,
timing.
can you help? Yes. Rachel.
One way that you can help is the Disability Law Center has a voting rights survey that we're asking folks to fill out when they go to their polling places, either early or on the day of elections. And it's got questions like we just talked about, the curbside voting element, the parking element, the clear pathway to the door. Another question that I forgot that is on there this year is asking election officials at your own voting precinct if they have had any obstacles with curbside voting. That's to assist some of that curbside voting legislation that might be coming up in January. So it's got a lot of different, it's a pretty short survey, but it's got different questions and different things we're asking you to look for at your own precinct and other precincts. We also have a video posted that trains you on how to do the survey. So if you want to do the survey, you're welcome to watch the video first. Please watch the video first and then do the survey. You can submit it online. And we will use that data to let the Board of Elections know how things are going. Last year, with the help of our volunteers and our staff, we surveyed over 550 polling locations. And a lot of that, a lot of the changes that we've asked to see are a result of what we see when we go out to polling locations. And we've gotten a lot of good collaborations with the Board of Elections and also general registrars. I have registrars calling my phone asking me at work, like, how can we make this better? How can we change this so that this is more accessible? So creating that collaboration is huge.
Yeah, I wanted to underscore that, and that was something I was going to mention, so I'm glad you did. I mean, this work that the Disability Law Center is doing, and getting volunteers to do these surveys is really critical, because what they've done is they've compiled the information. They sent a letter to the commissioner of the Department of Elections in Virginia. A matter of fact, she came to speak at one of the Virginia coalition meetings, right? Letting us know, based on the findings in the surveys that were done by the Disability Law Center, what they're going to be doing to, how they're going to be working with the local registrar to try to correct some of these issues, hopefully before this year's election, but also moving forward. And we understand that the process of this stuff doesn't get, mitigated overnight. But I guess I want to say that survey and people volunteering to do it is really having an impact, because, like I said, that information just doesn't sit in some computer, on Rachel's desk. They're sending it to the Department of Elections, and I'm glad to report that they seem to be taking it seriously and, want to, like I say, mitigate some of the violations. I just want to go back to being that we're having such an important election in Virginia on November 7th, our whole General Assembly. So all our legislators are up for election, and why this is so important. And like I said, we're nonpartisan. We don't, endorse candidates, but the Voting Rights Act that I talked about happened in 2021. That was under a different governor. We have a new governor right now, and depending what happens in the election, we don't know if some of this stuff can be overturned. So if you really care about your voting rights, and you want to make sure that what we were just talking about earlier that got approved in 2021 stays that way, then it is important, to vote. If there are certain disability issues you care about, you want to make sure that curbside voting bill includes all disabilities, not physical disabilities. Well, you should go out and vote. And whatever, it doesn't have to be disability related, but for people who may think that their vote doesn't count, it does count. It is your voice, and you really need to use it to either preserve what we already have, or if you want to see things change. And like I said, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, that is one, significant way to really use your political power is go vote. And again, it really does make a difference, especially, like I say, when these elections are so close. So I know sometimes people think their vote doesn't count, or, become complacent. Please don't use that power you have.
Right. Well, and I think so much of the disability vote is applicable to other groups as well. like low income, like, issues with food stamps and how much that is divvied, Medicaid, Medicare, like health insurance,
Special
housing
education.
crisis, special
Mhm.
education.
Yeah.
I mean, these issues affect so many people, families. I mean, it our issues are the community's issues. They really are. Um,
Mhm.
and I think making this accessible for us to get out there and talk about it like this is so important. And like you said, our votes are important. Helena, like that is just, it's so critical. You can feel isolated, you can feel alone, and like you're not important, and like giving up, don't get out, get out and vote. If you're having trouble, like, there are people that want to help you get out and vote. And there are also, if there isn't a survey in your state, start a survey, or reach out to organizations, see, hey, can we start a survey?
Yeah.
Because you guys have said, this has just become so incredible for Virginia doing this.
Right.
Did you have any thoughts or questions, Nate?
No, admittedly, this is not my subject, but I did enjoy listening to everything you guys said. Although, actually, Rachel, as a
Yeah.
lawyer who does pro bono work, do you also have a superhero alter ego that fights crime at night? Okay,
Not a lawyer. I forgot to say that. Not a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think Christina can vouch for the fact that I think there is an alter ego that fights crime at day and night and probably burns the candle on both ends.
Yes, I
Gotcha.
think very much so.
Yeah.
Christina,
I think I was going to say, I think
I
you're speaking for all disability rights advocates,
yeah,
Rachel.
Yes.
I think the burning candles on both ends is definitely
Yeah.
That's I think that's also, even though you guys aren't considered a nonprofit, but I think anybody who's doing, this civil rights work, I think it's part of it comes with the territory. Christina, just getting back to your point, I think the intersectionality piece that you were talking about was so important, because when we talk about people with disabilities, it transcends every demographic, every group,
Yeah.
right? Anybody, can get a disability at any point. And I think it's important to remember that, you can be a multiply marginalized person. And I think what's also important that you said is, yes, we should obviously be focused on a lot of issues that just specifically impact people with disabilities, but people with disabilities are like everybody else. Maybe they don't care as much about the disability issue, but they care about, abortion rights, or they may care about, some other climate change, which again, you can, all these could be tagged back to disability. But I think it's important to remember that people with disabilities, again, are like everybody else and have their own
Yeah.
issues, their own concerns that could go beyond just specific disability issues. And I think that intersectionality piece is really, really important. And it's
And our
becoming,
concerns are valid and important.
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, in terms of resources, in addition to what Rachel said, there are a lot of issues that are around like mental health and guardianship. And there's a really good organization called the Bazelon Center for Mental Health, Bazelon. I know they have a toolkit online specifically as it relates to the rights of people with mental health issues and guardianship. And we were talking earlier about individuals with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. There's an organization called SAVE, which self-advocates becoming empowered.
Yep.
Yeah. And I know they have a toolkit that specifically talks about voting and voting rights for folks with IDD. So there are a lot of, good resources out there. I mean, if somebody in Virginia wants to start becoming a little more engaged with these issues, I would welcome them to join our monthly coalition meeting. We meet the first Thursday of every month at 4 p.m. So again, and you can contact us at revupvirginia@gmail.com. And I know you're going to be sending this information out, but
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that people are aware that we're a coalition open to everyone and anyone who wants to join. I also wanted to say in terms of other ways to get engaged, especially if we're trying to enlighten, again, our political leaders and those running for office, that there is a disability vote, right? And we do wield some power, and the power is growing. So like town hall, right? A lot of legislators hold town halls. Well, try to get to your town hall if you can, and, make yourself present, ask specific questions that you care about, write your, congressional leaders, and on the state level, you can do that with your representatives and delegates. There's all different ways to engage and get involved. And again, I think it's just important. And part of it is not just having our political leaders realize that this is an important constituency, but I think the media, it's one of the reasons we had our press conference in Richmond that Christina spoke at a couple of weeks ago. I think they need to be educated. The general public needs to be educated. I mean, there's still a lot of misperceptions and stigma and, small-minded thinking around disability and what that means. And I think, it's post 30 years since the passage of the ADA, and certainly, attitudes are changing and accessibility is better, but we do have a long, way to go. And like I say,
Most definitely.
the more we can be out there.
I think we have to change to the concept of accessibility, particularly in regards to invisible disabilities and things like that. There's just so many barriers that keep people with invisible disabilities from being able to participate as much as they would like to in society as well. And there's just there's a world of invisible disabilities out there and physical disabilities. So it's about, like you said, education is key, educating ourselves, helping educate others, and feeling okay, allowing people to ask questions too, because I think that breaks down the barrier as well. If we get comfortable, allowing people to ask questions, I think questions are a sign that someone cares. They care enough to ask a question. So we shouldn't humiliate them in asking that question. And even if maybe they go about it, the quote unquote wrong way or with ignorant language, they're asking the question because they care. They're reaching out because they care. And it's our job to help them feel encouraged by what they've done and welcomed into the community.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think sometimes people feel intimidated, to say something. They may say the wrong thing. Like in every community, there's right language and wrong language. But I think sometimes you just have to embrace somebody who, like I said, if they want to ask a question because they're genuinely and authentically interested and, want to understand, what that person is experiencing, what do we mean by disability rights? What is accessible? I've heard of the ADA. I mean, a host of different questions. And being open-minded. And I also think, people with disabilities should just take pride in who they are. I think there's outside the community and inside the community. And I think, I see or saw a lot of this when I was at AAPD, because we had an internship for college students and graduate students with disabilities. And every summer, about over 400 students have come in the program. And attitudes are changing as you see a younger generation. There is so much, pride and activism. Matter of fact, one of the stats I didn't mention, it talked about that even though there was an increase in all different type of disabilities and demographics, the biggest increase in 2022 in terms of who came out to vote with a disability was young people. So that to me is really encouraging, right? It's the next generation.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yep.
That really is exciting.
And I think as things are changing, it's important for people to understand that accommodations and accessibility with voting is also changing. And,
Yeah.
what might be accessible one day for somebody might not be accessible for somebody else. It's an individualized thing. So I know Disability Law Center is also trying to get into the polling places and work with poll workers to educate them on, accommodations and what needs to be in place, but also explain that, things may change.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a cookie cutter approach.
It's absolutely not.
Yeah. And again, it's making sure that people with disabilities understand their rights, that they can ask for these things, be it,
Right.
at a polling place, in the workplace. I mean, they have laws protecting them from discrimination, and you should, not be intimidated to ask somebody for an accommodation or why this isn't accessible. It's your right. So I think, as you said earlier, Christina, education is such a big part of this.
Oh,
and again,
yeah.
knowing what your rights are.
I went several years thinking I couldn't vote because, like, just something you hit on just struck with me so much because when my disability is progressive, and there came a time when I couldn't work, and then I stopped being able to drive and stuff, and then I was wheelchair bound, and I was like, well, I don't know how I'm even going to do this. And then so I just assumed I wouldn't be able to, and I hadn't looked into it. And then I ended up getting back to a point of driving. I'm now back to a point of not driving. But when I was driving, I went out to a vote, and my aunt, she has multiple sclerosis. And she was telling me about curbside voting. And I was like, I didn't even know curbside voting was a thing. But it's like literally my polling place has never had curbside voting. The place that I lived for 8 years never had curbside voting. And there would never be signage or anything. And then for her, she knew she was supposed to. I mean, my aunt knows her rights. And like she is not going to be stopped from voting. Like she's gutsy. I love her. And I think we could all learn something from that. And but she's like, I know I'm allowed to vote. But there was no sign. So she was like calling the inside and stuff. And then like I think injured herself trying to get inside to find out what she was supposed to do. And they're like, oh, well, you're supposed to call us. She's like, well, it would be helpful if you had a sign with a number so I know who to call.
Right.
So yeah, know your rights. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, I found out a lot of people aren't going to tell you what those are. You have to do the work to find them. But that's why I'm so excited having you guys on here to help educate people about what their rights are, and we can get some information for them on our website too. So,
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
thank you. Did you have any follow-up thoughts before we sign off?
Go vote.
I was gonna say, vote on November 7th. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go vote.
Vote.
November 7th. We'll say November 7th or before if you're early voting.
That's true. Early voting. There's still early voting through November. Well, in Virginia,
through
November
the 4th.
I think November 4th, 5 p.m. You can vote early, or obviously you can go to the polls on the 7th. But I just read something that came across my email that what was it, 90? Oh, now I have to remember what it was. Something about in terms of local elections and 99%, and now I can't remember exactly what that. I'll get that. I'll email it to you. You can scratch this from the recording, but it was an amazing statistic about voting and like state or local elections, and a 99%, but I can't remember the whole thing. But it was it underscores why it's so important for us to go vote on November 7th. We're having a local election, but unfortunately I'm having a senior moment and can't remember exactly what the 99.
Remember what the stat?
We get brain fog all the time, so we're right there with you.
But I'm going to send it to you. I don't have it in front of me, but like I said, it just came across my email and I read it quickly. But I'll send it to you because it's apropos in light of this important state election we're having.
Go vote. Let us know your experiences. Fill out the survey. Let us know what your experiences are, and send them to us so that we can move forward and try to keep moving Virginia forward.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, and I guess my last plug for Rev Up Virginia, if you're interested, just email Rev Up Virginia, spelled out Virginia, at gmail.com. Even just to get on our mailing list, even if you don't want to join our monthly coalition meetings, but you can get on our mailing list. I know you're going to disseminate our one pager that has all our social media platforms. So a lot of different ways to engage with us and the Disability Law Center. And I certainly hope people choose to do that.
Well, thank you, ladies. We'll definitely have to have you back, particularly the follow-up to see how, the survey goes and how things are looking like post, once we get like new people in the seats and so great.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you. And for those listening and watching, stay tuned for Nate and I to do our after party. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Here's the button. Oh, it's up here this time.
If you want to contact us, please send a DM or email to speakinginspoons@gmail.com with any stories you have or would like to interview with us on any of our upcoming topics. And check out our website for all of our upcoming episodes and what's happening in the Speaking in Spoons community at www.speakinginspoons.com. Thank you for listening to Speaking in Spoons, and have a great day.
And we're back. I'm your host, Christina Brookman, and this is your co-host, Dr. Nate Straus, and we are doing our after party for the interview on voting that you just heard. So, Nate, you had mentioned during the interview that this wasn't really your thing. Did you mean that, like, politics, or you don't feel like you really know about the issues, or tell me more about that?
I know who the president is, and I know about the people contending to kind of run for this time around, but I don't know about the specific issues that pertain to disabled people, and I don't know specifically which candidate would be best for, the disabled community. So I don't know. And that part, I'm just not that knowledgeable about. It's just I haven't put my focus into that. I put my focus more into nutrition and medicine and trying to understand that stuff because that's more immediate to my life, I guess.
No, I understand. And I don't think you're alone. I think a lot of people, feel that way. And then actually, I got an email from Helena about that quote that she couldn't remember. And it was, did you know 99% of all elected positions are at the state and local level? Yes, 99%. So this year may not be a presidential election year, but every election matters. And most of the things that affect us are actually decided on at the state and local level. Like what are some things that you struggle with as a disabled person?
Like in general or related to politics?
Well, I think if you take the word politics out of it, it's like housing, right? Like we can't afford housing for ourselves very easily, right?
Yeah, but that's more related to like working than it is to actual housing.
Actually, it's not, because a lot of because there's HUD. Don't look at me like that. There's HUD, which is, the Department for Urban Development, Housing and Urban Development. And that's where we get a lot of income-based housing. for elderly and disabled people, or low income people. So like that's what I'm trying to get on a wait list for now, since I had housing where it was low income, and I kind of negotiated a lower rate with the people that owned it because they had a relative who was disabled, and it was actually an accessible apartment, which is also an issue, like the accessibility of apartments. Like, does it have a button so you can get in and out? That's Domino knocking the computer over. Can you get in and out with a wheelchair? Is it wheelchair accessible? Things like that. But also like the affordability of housing. Because if you can't work, like if you're on disability or you're low income, because of your disability or elderly, you need help with those type of housing situations, and that is absolutely through the government, and at the state and local level. And then like food stamps, you know um like how much we get for food stamps were just cut. Did you know that?
Did
Yeah,
not.
like food stamps. Like I used to get like a certain amount of food stamps. Like let's say like I think it was like like it went up during the pandemic, which was great. So I could start getting actual like vegetables and fruit. So I was getting like 180 a month, maybe more. Um, Now it's 35 a month. And like the cost of eggs and like anything, and I don't know how you feel about dairy, but like fresh fruit and vegetables is expensive, you know and so there's that. But also like, so food stamps, housing, transportation, like because the government helps with like can help with plans for transportation and things like that, so that there are buses, or like with insurance and things like that, so that you can get, like people have been talking about getting like ways to get paid for like Ubers and Lyfts, so that we can have more independence as disabled people when we're not able to drive. So like all of those are issues that affect us and affect other people with disability or elderly. And I think people don't realize, that those are issues that are being decided about at the state and local, and sometimes, federal level. But that's why voting is so important. And if it's not being decided on, it should be decided on. Like we could bring those, like it's important for us to bring the fact that those are things that people need to people's, attention. And we're back. The technical difficulties. But Nate, you were talking about spoons and like how difficult it is, to some days, the thought of getting out and voting. And I think what's something great that Virginia has done and other states are doing is early voting. So like, and at least here, like you have almost like a whole month to go and vote. So like if you wake up and you're like, I can't do it this day, you still have more time to try.
Yeah. I mean, I would call myself a more apathetic person, I suppose, when it comes to voting. Like I've gone to do it. I've made myself do it. And it used to be easier to do, and now it's very difficult to leave the house. So it's hard to even care about it. But I do think it's important, and I think people do need to exercise their right to vote. It's hard to find the right, I guess, I don't know what the word, like balance between exercising your right to vote and, living without a lot of inconvenience, I suppose.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think uh I think if more advocates and and friends to people with disability, really hear what you're saying, and that we really need people to push the accessibility of voting. And so accessibility isn't just curbside voting. It's early voting. It's easier, like for mail voting, so that all you had to do was do absentee voting, and then you don't have to worry about leaving your house at all. You just do a mail-in ballot. I mean, I would love for a day where we could go online and just
Right.
vote, like on our computers or our phones. Like, I don't understand why we're not there yet. Like, with all the technology in the world, that would
It's
just
not,
be so wonderful.
it's just, I guess, I don't know if they can't figure out the safety or the controversy around
Yeah.
doing it, especially since a lot of the people in Congress are super old and don't quite understand technology. So
Yeah.
I think that it's hard to move forward with that sort of like, I remember the old days when we used to write our ballots 3 miles before we, like, it's that kind of mentality. Like back in my
Bad.
we used to write our ballots by hand, like that kind, like it's just that
Well,
kind
then
of.
maybe you should write a letter to your elderly congressman or senator and tell them about your experience and why it's online voting would be so helpful, beneficial, not just to you, but to other people with disabilities and elderly people too, like all the people in the nursing home and assisted living.
Yeah,
Like
I
there's
should
issues that affect them.
a nice handwritten letter with my scribbly handwriting, and like I'll just like try to make it legible and then
You could type it and then sign it with your scribble scrabble.
type it on my typewriter.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I don't
Whatever.
have
You were in
I don't have
school. You could type.
I don't have a printer, but I mean I guess I could get someone to print it out for me and then send it to my congressman
Uh,
about making it easier to vote. I mean that could be, I don't, if only there was like a disabled person in Congress. Like that's, I feel like that's one of the
I feel like
demographics.
there is, and I feel like an idiot for not knowing. We
Well,
do
we did.
actually have a disabled person in as a governor in Texas. Um,
Well, we once had a secret disabled president, Roosevelt, who hid
yes,
his disability
yeah.
until he couldn't. But it just, I mean, I think in the 21st century, we're ready for a wheelchair congressman, or I don't know what you call it, just like a,
Wow, and
uh,
there's so many chronic illnesses out there and disabilities. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a hidden, invisible disability in our Congress, or
oh,
so
that's true. There
yeah.
probably are invisible
Or
disabilities for.
even if they don't, statistically, somebody has somebody in their family or circle of friends that experiences it. So that's why it's so important, even if you do not have the spoons to get out there and like, march or whatever, tell people what the issues are. Talk about the issues because it gets around, and you can pick up the phone and call your senator or your congressman. If you can't write, have somebody help you, like you just said, write a letter, or because I know I have writing problems too with my right hand, or if there's a printer issue, but get the word out there. And like they're shutting, we had our episode on nursing homes and assisted living. A lot of that is funded through vouchers through the government. Like Medicaid doesn't pay for assisted living in Virginia. It's different in every state. It's a voucher that you qualify for that is government funded. And you know those facilities are being shut down left and right because of lack of funding. And it's like, where do those people go? Like, we're about like it's the baby boomer generation. We're having an increased uptick in homelessness and stuff. That's really scary and horrible. And also, like, psychiatric facilities are getting shut down because of lack of funding, and then homelessness. Like, so it all comes down to the funding. People don't want to fund things, but then do you really want to see veterans and elderly and disabled people out on the street homeless. Like, that's where this funding goes. So, yeah. But Nate's
Anyway,
right. Do it in a way that you save your spoons.
Christina Brookman for Senate
No.
2020,
Oh my
2026.
gosh. I would be the worst. It's so bad.
It's going to be a what do you call it? Grass, was it where you a root
Grassroots.
grassroots? Yeah, Christina Brookman, Senate 2026.
No. But I
What's your
am gonna keep pushing issues. Yeah, because they
what's your
affect so many people.
what's your middle name, Christina?
Michelle,
The CMB.
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 They used to call me Brookman in college because we had a Christine, a Christina, and then me, Christina. So we all like kind of went by last names and stuff. So it was like Brookman. Yeah, I was so hardcore.
Yeah, no, Brookman for Senate happening. Starting a
Thank you.
grassroots
It's
movement.
happening. You're a ham bone.
Yeah,
But seriously, get out, vote this week, or I guess it's the next week, but vote. And if your state is not accessible, let people know about how important accessibility is so that you can vote, because these issues are so important for people and their families. So disability issues are community issues, period. So thanks, Nate. And I loved our guests and having them on. This is a very passion subject for me, because I don't like to see people suffering. And I think when we get out and vote, that's how there is strength in our voice. There's strength in our vote. I think one of their speakers at the local conference said that our superpower is our vote, and I loved that. I loved when she said that. I was like, yeah, that is our superpower. So on that note, save your spoons, guys, and go vote. Save your spoons so you can vote. And we'll see you later. Bye.
If you want to contact us, please send a DM or email to speakinginspoons@gmail.com with any stories you have or would like to interview with us on any of our upcoming topics. And check out our website for all of our upcoming episodes and what's happening in the Speaking in Spoons community at www.speakinginspoons.com. Thank you for listening to Speaking in Spoons, and have a great day.